Why was Bloodraven allowed to take the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister to the wall, and where is it now? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. Here we cover A Song of Ice and Fire in depth, as well as the wider world of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, and Dunk and Egg. And The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher too. If that sounds good, there's a subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen. This video has been made in collaboration with the excellent History of Westeros. I'd highly recommend checking out their channel or podcast. There's a link in the description. In 233 AC, there was a succession crisis in the Seven Kingdoms. Hand of the King, Brynden Rivers, aka Bloodraven, called a great council so the lords of the realm could debate and argue and vote for their next king, because the alternative might be civil war. Word of the Great Council spread far and wide, and even the fifth son of Daemon Blackfyre, in whose name by then 3 Blackfyre rebellions had taken place, Aenys Blackfyre, asked permission to attend the council to make his case. Bloodraven granted him safe conduct from his home in Tyrosh in the name of the Iron Throne. But it was a lie. As soon as Aenys arrived, he was seized and executed. His head was presented to the Great Council as a warning to anyone with Blackfyre sympathies. The winner of the Great Council was Aegon V, called Aegon the Unlikely, or Egg, as in Dunk and Egg, and the new king was faced with an immediate decision: what to do about Bloodraven. He was the Hand of the King and had guaranteed Aenys Blackfyre's safety in the name of the king, but then very publicly broke that word. Bloodraven did not deny that his action was dishonourable, but claimed that he had only sacrificed his own personal honour. But Aegon disagreed, believing the shame fell on the Iron Throne and all of House Targaryen, not just Brynden Rivers alone. The word of the royal house was sullied. Who could believe the word of the Iron Throne now, for as long as Bloodraven was Hand of the King? Egg felt that he had no choice and ordered the Hand's imprisonment. As is the case for many condemned criminals, Bloodraven was offered the wall instead of death. He accepted and made ready to head north to live out the remainder of his years. But he would not go alone. 200 other prisoners took ship with him, many of them his former men, the Raven's Teeth. Maester Aemon, though not a prisoner, decided to go as well. They were escorted by Sir Duncan the Tall himself. This is all fairly well documented in the main sources. Lesser known is that Bloodraven took with him Dark Sister, his Valyrian steel sword. After the sword Blackfyre had been lost to the Blackfyres and Bittersteel in Essos, Dark Sister was the only Valyrian steel sword that the Targaryens had left. So, given the severity of Bloodraven's crime and subsequent punishment, if he hadn't gone to the wall he would have been killed, we have to ask, why was this allowed? Why didn't Aegon V reclaim the sword for the family before sending Bloodraven to the wall? Before we delve into the main question, let's first explain why we can be so certain that Dark Sister made this journey in the first place. In August of 2018, a few months before publishing Fire and Blood, Ashaya of History of Westeros podcast asked George R.R. Martin directly if Bloodraven took Dark Sister to the wall with him, and he gave a straight and confident yes. So we know that he did take it with him to the wall, but how odd was it that Bloodraven was allowed to keep it in the first place? The short answer is very odd. Valyrian steel swords are rare and hugely valuable, and Dark Sister was more storied than most. It had been wielded by legends of Westeros: Queen Visenya, Prince Daemon Targaryen, and Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. It was very likely owned by other Targaryens before the Doom as well, though we don't know how old the sword actually is. Valyrian steel was never common, even at the height of the Freehold, and after the Doom it became even rarer. Just to take one example to prove this point, the Lannisters used to own a Valyrian steel sword called Brightroar, but it was lost before the conquest. Tywin tried to use the great wealth of Casterly Rock to acquire a new one, offering many Westerosi families huge sums for theirs, but all refused. Valyrian steel swords are invaluable and irreplaceable. Against this, we have the only other known example of a Valyrian steel blade on the wall, Longclaw, which went from House Mormont to Jon Snow, another Targaryen bastard with both Valyrian and Old Gods heritage, it should be said. As a quick aside to address a fandom theory that has suggested that Jon Snow's new sword Longclaw and Dark Sister are one and the same, they are very different. The former is a bastard sword, or a hand-and-a-half sword, which is much larger than a longsword. John has to wear it on his back because of its length. On the other hand, Dark Sister is definitively known to be a small longsword. We've seen it on Bloodraven's hip. They look very different. Not to mention that Longclaw has apparently been with the Mormonts for centuries, and Bloodraven left for the Wall less than 70 years before the start of A Song of Ice and Fire, and they are both very famous swords, so people would know the difference. Anyway, back to our main question. Why might Aegon V allow Bloodraven to keep hold of the family sword? Well, perhaps there's a historical reason here, connected to the other Valyrian steel sword House Targaryen used to own. A few decades earlier, Aegon IV, the Unworthy, had gifted Blackfire to his bastard son Daemon. The sword quickly became the rallying cry for Daemon's supporters. He has the Targaryen sword of the kings. He must be Aegon IV's choice for king. When Daemon Blackfire was killed on the Redgrass field, Bittersteel decided he had to retrieve the sword, lest their cause die forever. It was that important. With the sword in their possession, he and Daemon's other sons and their descendants continued to plague the realm, even after Bloodraven executed Aenys Blackfire. The sword that bore the name of their house remained their key symbol. To them it was everything, little different to a crown. It follows, then, that the Iron Throne would want to downplay the value of Blackfire. They denied that the sword held any dynastic or royal power. And all this wasn't history for the newly crowned king. Aegon V had lived through most of it. He fought in both the Third and Fourth Blackfire rebellions personally, and helped undo the Second before it became a war. Perhaps then Dark Sister was left with Bloodraven because Aeg and his family didn't want it to become another symbol of rule. Let's just downplay the importance of Valyrian steel swords. The Targaryens weren't lacking for money, so they didn't need it to pay the bills. It was just the symbolism that mattered. If two relatively equal Targaryen claimants made a play for the throne, and one of them held a Targaryen Valyrian steel blade, while the other didn't, it might help gain additional support. Assigning it lesser status would help ensure it wouldn't make much, if any, difference in a succession crisis. Or perhaps Aeg let Bloodraven keep it because Aeg didn't want it. Perhaps Aeg really was as disgusted by what Bloodraven did as he says, and wanted to distance himself from that. Or perhaps he thought that the sword was simply too connected to Bloodraven in people's minds. Bloodraven had been Hand for over 25 years by this point, and had wielded Dark Sister for even longer, perhaps as long as 40 years. He was feared by the lords and the people alike, thought of as a sorcerer worthy of suspicion, and a kinslayer. And Aeg was already associated with Bloodraven in the Lord's minds. Bloodraven had organised the Great Council that made Aeg King Aegon V, against most of the Lord's initial wishes. And he was about to undertake a series of reform measures that would take power away from the Lords of the Land, giving it to the small folk. They didn't want him, and distrusted Bloodraven, so was taking Bloodraven's sword as his own really the look he wanted? Surely he would want to completely distance himself from that. For all of these reasons, it probably was practical and pragmatic to let Bloodraven just keep the sword, then instruct the Night's Watch to return it to the Red Keep upon Bryndon's eventual death. Bloodraven was 58 years old by that point. Realistically, how much longer could he be expected to live? Aeg would very probably still be on the throne by then, and enough time would have passed that any associations with the feared kinslayer Bloodraven will have diminished. So if we're looking for a logical reason why Aegon V let Bloodraven take Dark Sister to the Wall, something along these lines makes sense. Bitter experience with the sword Blackfire meant that the Targaryens were trying to downplay the importance of their Valyrian steel swords, and this one in particular was connected strongly with a very divisive figure, one that Aeg will have been keen to distance himself from. In any event, the Wall was a pretty neutral place. Aeg's brother Aemon would be there to keep an eye on things, and Bloodraven would soon be an old man. Aeg could easily reclaim the sword in a few years once Bloodraven was dead. So although it may seem like a bit of an odd decision to let the sword stay with Bloodraven, we don't need more of an explanation. However, there is a rather more intriguing possibility here. What if, although Aeg knew he had to be seen to be punishing Bloodraven for what he did, this wasn't really a punishment? Certainly the manner of Bloodraven's journey to the wall wasn't in shame. The king's own brother joined the Night's Watch at the same time. A sizable group of Bloodraven's personal guard went with him, and they were escorted by Egg's best friend, Lord Commander Dunk. This is how Aemon, Maester Aemon as we know him, described it. He, Egg, sent me north aboard the Golden Dragon, and insisted that his friend Sir Duncan see me safe to Eastwatch. No recruit had arrived at the wall with so much pomp since Nymeria sent the watch 6 kings in golden fetters. Egg emptied out the dungeons too, so I would not need to say my vows alone. My honour guard, he called them. One was no less a man than Brynden Rivers. Later, he was the chosen Lord Commander. Pomp? An honour guard for Aemon? This doesn't sound like Bloodraven being sent up in disgrace, more perhaps a matter of Aemon going to the wall in honour and Bloodraven happening to be going with him. Which leads us to an even more intriguing possibility. This period of time is the most magical period of Targaryen history. Bloodraven and Shiras Istar were known sorcerers. All 4 of Maekar's sons were dragon dreamers. Aerys I was obsessed with prophetic scrolls and books. The prince that was promised prophecy was used to influence the line of succession, and so on. Egg himself would, in a few short years, become consumed with the passion to hatch dragon eggs. These people's priorities were not just about good governance or public relations. They were about dragons and the prince that was promised and prophecy. Egg is no exception to this. We know that the original A Song of Ice and Fire prophecy from Aegon I spoke of, and this is a quote from House of the Dragon, so not book canon, but definitely clear through George R. R. Martin first. "'Tis to begin with a terrible winter gusting out from the distant north. Aegon saw absolute darkness riding on those winds, and whatever dwells within will destroy the world of the living." Might Egg have sent Bloodraven and Aemon there because he sensed that the time was near, that this terrible winter gusting out from the distant north was a real and present danger? If so, surely a sensible response would be to send one of his closest friends and advisors to the wall to keep an eye on things, as well as reinforce the Night's Watch with a couple of 100 battle-hardened veterans, and also a sorcerer versed in both Targaryen dragon dreams and the magic of the old gods. And if those things sound reasonable, then surely allowing a Valyrian steel sword to go to the wall as well is not far-fetched at all. All while Aegon V himself focused his attention on hatching those dragon eggs. Do we know any of that to be true? No, but it fits the facts. And even if there are not any magical or prophetic reasons for Egg allowing Dark Sister to go to the wall, there are a lot of more practical and pragmatic ones too. In any event, the sword did go to the wall, so it's not a matter of coming up with a tinfoil theory here, it's just a matter of figuring out why. And I suppose what significance that will have later in the story. If it went to the wall with Bloodraven, as we know, there's a very good chance that it went north of the wall with him too. There's certainly no hint that it's still in Castle Black. So it's very probably in Bloodraven's cave right now in the story, with Bran and Maura and Hodor and the gang. Who might wield it next? Maura? She is quite a dark sister, although Arya is undoubtedly an even darker sister, but that would make for a whole other video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos about the deeper lore of A Song of Ice and Fire, please click on the link to the playlist on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, the best way to do that is by clicking the link to Patreon on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.